The silence in the house was the first thing she noticed. It wasn't empty silence. It was heavy, pressed down and polished like the black marble floors that swallowed the sound of her worn-out sneakers. Imani adjusted the strap of her tote bag, the worn canvas a stark contrast to the severe, minimalist luxury surrounding her. Her light blue scrubs felt flimsy, an apology in a world that demanded armor. She was late. Of course she was late. Her alarm had failed, the bus had rerouted, and a coffee had sacrificed itself to the front of her spare uniform. Chaos, it seemed, was her natural state. A man who looked more like a statue than a person stood waiting in the cavernous foyer. His suit was a severe cut of charcoal wool, his expression carved from stone. He didn't greet her. He simply tilted his head, a gesture that managed to be both a summons and a dismissal, and led her down a long hallway. Sunlight, sliced into perfect, sterile bars by towering windows, striped the floor. Everything was gray, black, and white. A monochrome world, for a monochrome man. They stopped before a set of double doors made of dark, imposing wood. The man, Mr. Park, his name had been in the agency email, spoke for the first time. His voice was as flat as the architecture. Mr. Kwan does not tolerate incompetence. He does not tolerate excuses. You are the 7th caregiver in 4 months. Do not expect to be the 8th. Imani just nodded, her throat suddenly dry. She'd read the file. Kwon Jin-woo, 32 years old. Head of a private investment firm with holdings across Asia. A car accident on the Hanam Bridge 6 months ago had left him with a spinal cord injury. Paraplegic. The file had been thin on personal details, thick on medical terminology and warnings about his temperament.
Difficult, it said.
Volatile. Prone to periods of non-communication. Mr. Park opened one of the doors. Your shift is 12 hours. You will assist with his physical therapy regimen, meals, and any personal needs. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will not touch anything that is not directly related to your duties. The room was less a bedroom and more a command center. One wall was a sheet of glass overlooking the sprawling, manicured gardens and the distant haze of Seoul. Another was filled with monitors displaying stock tickers and security feeds. In the center of it all, positioned before the window, was a man in a wheelchair.
He wasn't looking at them.
His gaze was fixed on the city below, his profile sharp and unforgiving. Even seated, his presence filled the room, a low hum of absolute authority. He wore a simple black cashmere sweater and tailored gray trousers, the fabric falling with a perfect crease over legs that would never again hold his weight. On his wrist, a Patek Philippe watch caught the light, a silent testament to a world where time was money and money was power. His hands rested on the arms of the chair, long-fingered and still, but they looked capable of snapping steel. That was Kwon Jin-woo. Imani took a hesitant step into the room, and in true fashion, her sneaker caught on the edge of an absurdly expensive-looking Persian rug. She stumbled, pinwheeling her arms to catch her balance. Her tote bag swung forward, its contents spilling across the pristine floor. A half-eaten protein bar, a dog-eared paperback, a tube of cherry lip balm, and a bright yellow stress ball bounced and rolled, coming to a stop near the wheels of his chair. Mortification burned hot in her cheeks. Mr. Park's jaw tightened into a knot of pure fury. But Kwon Jin-woo finally moved. He turned his head, slowly, deliberately. His eyes, dark and depthless, found hers. There was no anger in them. There was nothing. It was worse than anger. It was a complete lack of interest, the way one might glance at a fly buzzing against a window pane.
"Clean that up," he said.
His voice was low, a gravelly baritone that seemed to vibrate in the air.
It was not a request.
Imani scrambled to gather her things, her fingers fumbling. As she reached for the yellow stress ball, his hand shot out, impossibly fast, and covered it. His skin was cool against hers, a brief, shocking contact. She froze, her gaze lifting from his hand to his face. He was looking at her, really looking at her for the first time. A flicker of something, curiosity, annoyance, disturbed the placid cold of his expression. "Leave it," he commanded, his fingers closing around the small foam ball. He picked it up, turning it over and over. Mr. Park, you may go. The older man looked scandalized. Sir, she is clearly not. Go, the word was quiet, but it had the force of a physical blow. Mr. Park bowed stiffly and retreated, closing the door with a soft, defeated click. The silence that descended was different. It was charged, active. Imani slowly got to her feet, clutching the rest of her belongings to her chest. Jinwoo didn't look at her. He stared down at the ridiculous yellow ball in his hand, squeezing it rhythmically. The motion was small, controlled, but it was the only sign of life in his otherwise rigid posture. The agency said you were competent, he stated, his voice flat. I am, Imani said, her own voice coming out stronger than she expected. I'm just sometimes uncoordinated. Uncoordinated, he repeated, the word tasting strange in his mouth. He finally looked up, his eyes sweeping over her, from her messy bun of braids to her mismatched socks peeking out from her sneakers. All the others were coordinated. They were quiet, efficient. They lasted an average of 17 days, he paused, his gaze lingering on her face. They bored me. Before she could process that, a sharp crack echoed from outside, followed by another. It wasn't a car backfiring. It was the distinct, ugly sound of gunfire. Jinwoo's entire demeanor shifted. The bored disinterest vanished, replaced by a predatory stillness that was terrifying. His eyes darted to one of the security monitors, his face hardening into a mask of pure, cold fury. On the screen, two figures in black were scaling the perimeter wall. Get away from the window, he ordered, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. He was already maneuvering his chair, moving with a fluid, practiced grace that belied his condition. He pressed a nearly invisible button on the armrest. Steel shutters began to descend over the massive glass wall, sealing them in. Imani was frozen for a half-second, her heart hammering against her ribs. Then her training, her instinct for competence under pressure, kicked in. She ran not for the door, but towards him. He was a target, immobile in the center of the room. Another sound, closer this time. The shattering of glass from downstairs. Stay behind me, he commanded, his hand reaching inside his sweater and producing a sleek, black handgun that seemed to appear from nowhere. The door to the room burst open. Not Mr. Park. A man in a black ski mask, a suppressed pistol in his hand. Imani didn't think. She reacted. She grabbed the heaviest thing she could find, a thick, crystal decanter from a nearby bar cart, and hurled it with all her might. It was a clumsy, desperate throw, but it worked. The decanter caught the intruder on the side of the head. He staggered, his aim wavering for a critical second. It was all the opening Jinwoo needed. The sound of his gun was a dull cough, brutally efficient. The man in the mask crumpled to the floor. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by Imani's ragged breathing. She stared at the body, then at the gun in Jinwoo's hand, then at his face. He wasn't even breathing hard. His expression was grim, focused, the look of a man fluent in a language she was only just beginning to understand was violence. He holstered his weapon and looked at her, his dark eyes unreadable. The yellow stress ball lay forgotten on the floor. You're not boring, he said, and it was the most terrifying compliment she had ever received. You're a liability, which means you're not going anywhere. The mansion became her prison, a gilded cage of marble and silent, watchful men in dark suits. The failed attack had raised the stakes. Jinwoo's enemies, a rival clan known as the White Tigers, now knew his fortress could be breached. They saw his paralysis as an opportunity, a fatal weakness in the armor of the formidable Quan Empire. And Imani, the clumsy caregiver who had witnessed the failed hit, was now a loose end. Or, as Jinwoo had put it, his liability. She was confined to the sprawling estate for her own safety, which felt suspiciously like being a hostage. Her 12-hour shifts bled into 24-hour days. She slept in a guest suite that was larger than her entire apartment, with silk sheets that felt alien against her skin. The chaos of her old life was replaced by a rigid, suffocating order. Every meal was served at a precise time. Every movement was monitored. The only unpredictable element in this tightly controlled world was her relationship with its king. Jinwoo was a puzzle of brutal contradictions. He was demanding, impatient, and wielded his intellect like a weapon, directing his vast criminal enterprise from his wheelchair with a quiet, surgical lethality. Yet, in the quiet hours of the night, when the pain in his legs was a phantom torment, a different man would surface. One night, she found him in the library, the monitors dark for once. He was staring at a small, silver-framed photograph on his desk. She had seen it before, but never up close. As she approached with his scheduled medication, she saw the woman in the picture clearly for the first time. She was beautiful, with a radiant smile, her arm linked through Jinwoo's. He was standing in the photo, whole and unbroken, a rare, genuine smile on his face. "She was in the car with me," he said, his voice rough. He didn't look at Imani, but he didn't hide the photo either. "Her name was Sohee. The attack was meant for me. She paid the price for being at my side." There it was. The wound he carried, deeper than the injury to his spine. It wasn't just the loss of his mobility, it was the crushing weight of his failure to protect the woman he loved. His coldness wasn't just a personality trait, it was a penance. A wall built to ensure no one would ever get close enough to become a target again. "I'm sorry," Imani whispered, the words feeling small and useless. He finally looked at her, his eyes hollow. Sorrow is a useless currency. It buys nothing. He pushed the photograph away, turning his chair to face her, the mask of the cold-hearted boss sliding back into place. "It is time for my physical therapy." The danger outside the walls continued to escalate. A car bomb was discovered under one of his lieutenant's vehicles. A trusted warehouse manager was found to be feeding information to the White Tigers. The air in the mansion grew thick with paranoia. Jinwoo became even more withdrawn, his nights spent in silent, strategic warfare against an enemy determined to dismantle his world. During this time, Imani found an opportunity. A new kitchen supplier was making a delivery, and the security protocols were slightly relaxed. One of the guards, a younger man who looked at her with pity, motioned her towards the delivery van. 5 minutes, he'd whispered. They won't check the back. It goes straight through the city. Freedom was a short, 50-foot walk across a pristine brick driveway. She could disappear back into her chaotic, normal life. She could forget the sound of gunfire, the sight of a dead man on a Persian rug, and the haunted look in a Mafia boss's eyes. She took a step towards the van, then hesitated. She glanced back at the house, at the towering wall of glass that was his window. She imagined him in there, alone, fighting a war from a chair, surrounded by men who feared him but did not understand the ghost that haunted him. She thought of the small, involuntary tightening of his hand when the pain was bad, a vulnerability he would never admit to. Leaving felt like running. It felt like abandoning someone in the middle of a storm. In a moment of terrifying clarity, she knew she couldn't. She shook her head at the guard, a small, decisive motion, and turned back.
She chose to stay.
That night, she found him struggling. He was trying to transfer from his wheelchair to his bed, a task he usually performed with a grim, practiced efficiency. But tonight, his muscles were spasming, his body refusing to cooperate. Frustration radiated from him in palpable waves. He would never ask for help. Pride was the last armor he had left. Imani didn't ask. She walked over, her movements calm and sure. "Let me," she said, her voice soft but firm. He stiffened, ready to snarl a refusal, but he stopped when he saw the look on her face. It wasn't pity. It was resolve. He gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod. She moved with the professional competence that was so often overshadowed by her surface clumsiness. Her hands were gentle but strong as she positioned herself, supporting his weight. For a moment, they were pressed together, his chest against her shoulder, his breath warm against her neck. The room was silent except for the whisper of fabric and their breathing. His scent filled her senses, cedarwood and something clean, like cold night air. His body was tense, a coiled spring of muscle and frustration. She held him steady, her presence a solid, grounding force. When he was finally settled in bed, she went to pull away, but his hand shot out and clamped around her wrist. It wasn't a painful grip, but it was absolute.
He didn't speak.
He just looked at her, his dark eyes searching her face. The space between them crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with danger, and everything to do with the man holding her captive and the woman who had chosen to stay. The silence was not empty. It was filled with the things they could not say: gratitude, fear, and a terrifying, burgeoning connection. He held her there for a long moment, his thumb stroking the sensitive skin of her wrist, before finally, reluctantly, letting her go. The leader of the White Tigers was a man named Choi Min-jun. He wasn't just a rival, he was a ghost from Jin-woo's past. They had come up together in the organization, two sides of the same coin. Jin-woo was the strategist, the cold calculator. Choi was the enforcer, fueled by a savage ambition that Jin-woo had always mistrusted. It was Choi who had orchestrated the accident on the bridge, a bloody coup designed to seize power. He had failed to kill Jin-woo, but he had succeeded in breaking him, or so he thought. The war between them became personal, a chess match played with bullets and bodies. The mansion was no longer a fortress, it was the epicenter of the conflict. One afternoon, the violence finally breached the inner sanctum. A trusted member of the household staff, a quiet woman who had served the Kwon family for decades, let two of Choi's men into the house. She had been coerced, her own family threatened. Imani was in the solarium, trimming a wilting orchid, one of the few tasks she'd invented for herself to combat the suffocating boredom. When they came for her, they moved with silent, brutal efficiency. One moment she was contemplating the brown spots on a petal, the next a gloved hand was clamped over her mouth and the cold, hard press of a gun was at her temple. From his command center, Jin-woo saw it all on a security feed. A guttural sound, something between a snarl and a cry of pure rage, was torn from his throat. He saw Imani's wide, terrified eyes. He saw the way she struggled, a flash of defiance even in her fear. And he felt that same, sickening wave of powerlessness that had consumed him on the bridge as he watched So-hee die. He was trapped in his chair, a king on a broken throne, as the most important piece on his board was about to be taken. But Imani was not a pawn. As the men dragged her towards a side exit, she did something unexpected. She went limp, a dead weight, then twisted violently, stomping her heel down hard on the arch of one man's foot. He grunted in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. She didn't try to run. She shoved him backwards, directly into the path of his partner. The two men collided in a clumsy tangle of limbs. It was the chaos of a cornered animal, intelligent and desperate. The diversion lasted only 3 seconds, but it was enough. Jin-woo's men, directed by his clipped, precise commands through their earpieces, converged on the solarium. The firefight was short and merciless. When it was over, 2 more bodies lay on the pristine tile, and Imani was huddled behind a large ceramic planter, shaking but alive. Later, after the bodies had been removed and the illusion of sterile order restored, Jin-woo found her in the library. She was staring into the cold fireplace, her arms wrapped around herself. "They came for me," she said, her voice a raw whisper. "He's using me to get to you." "I know." Jin-woo's voice was tight, strained with a fury he was barely holding in check. "It will not happen again." "How can you know that? You can't be everywhere." "You can't," she trailed off, stopping herself from saying the cruel truth. "You can't protect anyone." He wheeled his chair closer, until their knees were almost touching. "Why did you stay?" he demanded, his voice low and intense. "You had a chance to leave." "I know you did. Why are you still here?" The question hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. Imani finally lifted her head, her eyes meeting his. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something harder, something that had been forged in the fire of the last few weeks. "Because leaving felt more dangerous," she said, the words an honest, unvarnished truth. It was a confession, not of love, but of something far more complex and binding. She had crossed a line, and staying in this violent world felt more survivable than trying to return to the one she'd left behind. A muscle worked in his jaw. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment before his fingers gently brushed a stray braid back from her face. His touch was feather-light, almost reverent. "You are the only person," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he rarely allowed himself, "who looks at me and does not see a cripple or a monster." The admission was a crack in his armor, a glimpse of the man beneath the king. It was more intimate than a kiss, more binding than a vow. And in that moment, they both knew the rules had changed. She was no longer just his caregiver or his liability. She was his vulnerability. And Choi Min-ju knew it too. The final move came a week later. It wasn't a frontal assault. It was a quiet, insidious threat. A package arrived for Imani, delivered through a corrupted channel. Inside was a single, perfect white orchid, identical to the ones in the solarium. And a note. "He can't keep you in a glass house forever." It was a promise. Choi wasn't going to storm the gates again. He was going to wait for her. He would catch her the moment she stepped outside, turning Jinwoo's fortress into a permanent prison. He was targeting her soul, not just her body. That night, Imani walked into Jinwoo's office. She placed the orchid on his desk. "He's trying to suffocate you," she said, her voice steady. "He thinks if he traps me here, he traps you. He thinks you'll make a mistake trying to protect me." Jinwoo stared at the flower, his knuckles white where he gripped the arms of his chair. "He is right." "No," Imani said, shaking her head. "He's wrong. He thinks I'm a princess in a tower. He doesn't know me." She looked at him, her gaze direct and unflinching. "And he doesn't know you. He thinks that chair is a weakness. But your mind is the most dangerous weapon in this city. So use it. Set a trap, and I'll be the bait." The plan was audacious, born of desperation and a deep, unspoken trust. They would leak information that Imani was being moved, transported out of the city, for her own safety. They would create a convoy, a decoy. But the real trap would be laid at a place Choi would never suspect, a high-end art gallery in Gangnam that he used as a front for money laundering, a place he felt untouchable. Imani, using her knowledge as a caregiver, would claim Jinwoo had a medical emergency, forcing a stop at a clinic known to be in Choi's pocket. The night of the operation, the air was electric with tension. Imani wasn't wearing her scrubs. She was in a simple black dress, her hair pulled back. She looked not like a caregiver, but like a queen moving her piece into play. As she prepared to leave, Jinwoo stopped her. He held out a small, silver locket. "So he said, his voice thick. She believed it brought her luck. "I have no use for luck. But perhaps you do." Imani let him fasten it around her neck, his cool fingers brushing against her skin. It was a transfer of hope, an acknowledgement of the past, and a prayer for the future. The plan went exactly as they'd foreseen. The convoy was hit. While Choi's forces were occupied with the decoy, Imani and a small, loyal team diverted to the clinic. As expected, Choi himself arrived, arrogant and victorious, walking into the trap he believed he was setting. He found Imani not in a treatment room, but waiting for him in the empty lobby, flanked by two of Jinwoo's most loyal men. The surprise on his face was fleeting, replaced by a cold fury. "The cripple sent his nurse to do his fighting?" Choi sneered. "No," a voice said from the shadows. Jinwoo wheeled himself into the light. He had been there the whole time, concealed, waiting. "I sent my queen to checkmate a pawn." The confrontation was brutal and swift. Choi's ambition had made him predictable. Jinwoo's supposed weakness had made him underestimated. When it was over, Choi Min-jun's reign was finished, and the threat was finally neutralized. But victory came at a cost. Mr. Park, the stoic, stone-faced man who had served Jinwoo so loyally, was gravely injured protecting him. The empire was secure, but it was scarred. Days later, a quiet calm settled over the mansion. The extra guards were gone. The tension in the air had dissipated, replaced by a heavy, contemplative silence. Imani stood by the massive window in Jinwoo's room, looking out at the glittering lights of Seoul. The city looked peaceful from up here, a beautiful eye. She heard the soft whir of his chair approaching. He stopped beside her, following her gaze. The silver locket was cool against her skin. "Mr. Park will recover," he said. It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement of the price that had been paid. "I know," she replied softly. They stood in silence for a long time, two disparate souls bound together by violence and circumstance. "You are free to go," he said finally, the words costing him more than he would ever admit. "I can arrange it. A new life, anywhere you want. You will be safe." Imani turned from the window to look at him. She saw the powerful Mafia boss, the ruthless strategist who controlled a city's underworld. But she also saw the man haunted by a ghost, the man who felt more in his chair than most men felt on their own 2 feet. She saw Kwon Jinwoo. She reached out and placed her hand on his, the one resting on the arm of his chair. His skin was warm. "You once told me sorrow is a useless currency," she said. "But what about safety? Is it worth anything if you're alone?" A flicker of raw emotion, of unguarded vulnerability, crossed his face. He intertwined his fingers with hers, his grip firm, possessive. It was no longer the grip of a captor, but of an anchor. "You are mine, Imani," he stated, not as a claim of ownership, but as a simple, undeniable truth. That is no longer a choice. She looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his dark, intense eyes. The world outside was dangerous, and the world inside these walls was no different. But here, with him, the chaos finally felt like it had found its center. "No," she agreed, her voice quiet but certain. "It never was."